Very good morning this Sunday morning, the 27th day of May 2018. You're just in time for Kenya's premier Sunday morning political show. Sunday edition begins right now. Thanks for joining us for the next 120 minutes or so. We shall be dissecting some of the biggest political and governance stories making headlines in the Republic. And of course, a lot is happening in terms of corruption scandals. First, it was the National Youth Service, a fresh scandal involving, possibly from the initial investigations, 10 billion shillings. We'll take a look at the latest from that. There have been some grilling this past week. The PS, Omolo being grilled, a lot of back-passing involved in that. Also, there's a fresh probe at the National Cereals and Produce Board, NCPB, where more than 1 billion Kenya shillings was paid out to 18 unscrupulous maize traders. 8 of them, 7 from Eldoret, were paid more than 800, or are supposed to be paid more than 800 million Kenya shillings. All these 18 apparently failed the vetting test that was done, but they still got those deals. We shall be taking a look at what's happening there. Remember, this coming just days after the CS in charge of agriculture, Mwangi Kiunjuri, said he was cleaning that ministry. A few days earlier, the MD, Terer, also did resign from that ministry. A lot of happening there as farmers continue to suffer. Many thanks for joining us. Of course, we'll talk about the drama that continues to be the Nairobi show, where the Governor Mike Sonko has been operating from the county of Machakos. Just what gives there? Many thanks for joining us. I have with me my panel. Is here with me Kipchumba Karori, lawyer and political strategist, political analysts and communication experts as Bono Wheeler and Mark Bichache, and political risk analyst Dismas Mokua. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me this morning. We'll be talking about all that and a lot more. First, let's begin with what's happening in the dailies this Sunday morning. All right, gentlemen, let's begin with the Sunday Nation. The splash is Raila makes maiden trip as peace envoy. This is, of course, following the appointment of the opposition leader as the peace envoy to South Sudan. He did visit South Sudan and held a 7-hour talk or meeting with President Salva Kiir in a bid to end the deadly conflict in the troubled neighboring country ahead of a trip to South Africa next week for another meeting with the exiled former Vice President of South Sudan, Riek Machar. Let me begin with you, Dismas. This appointment of Raila Odinga, what do you make of it?
Well, you know, many people are asking whether or not there are any fruits from this handshake, and it's very clear that the Honorable Raila Odinga managed to secure for himself a position as a special envoy, and we should give him a pat on the back and wish him well. However, his supporters may be lost in the woods asking, so when we invested our resources and time in supporting Mr. Raila Odinga's vision, where has he left us? He has left us in the middle of the woods, and we do not know what is happening. But again, I'm hoping that the presidency and the African Union would actually give Raila Odinga the necessary support for him to be a success in this mission, so that at least he's got something to write home. Because there's a very high probability that the handshake is going to be a failure. And if he doesn't deliver as a special envoy, then he'll become a laughingstock.
Mark, is this what... a few shows ago, there was talk for Raila Odinga to stop with his politics and become a Nelson Mandela of sorts. Is this what the pundits meant?
Of course, this is what they meant, and for me, I think both for the state and for the president and for Raila Odinga, this is the best move he could do, and this is what I mean. Number one, being an envoy of peace is a natural fit for Raila Odinga, because he is one of the architects of very many handshakes in this country. His handshake with Daniel Arap Moi in the late 90s that then ushered his union with KANU. His handshake with Mwai Kibaki, which then ushered the government of national unity. His handshake with Uhuru Kenyatta. Raila Odinga has demonstrated more than once that he has the capacity to bury the hatchet and put the good of the country at the head. Secondly, let's understand very clearly, the moment the voters of Raila Odinga did not meet the threshold of beating Uhuru Kenyatta in the elections, they must have known, and they should know, and Dismas should know, that at that point their journey to Canaan ended. Let's not put extra responsibility upon Raila Odinga. He has no power at all to execute the mandate that was envisioned in his journey to the proverbial Canaan, and therefore we cannot hold him ransom saying that now he has left his supporters orphaned.
But he did
they were
give
orphaned.
them some hope. He did lead them on that they were onto something, that he was, his political crusade was legitimate.
Yeah, but what choice did he have based on the amount of agitation and passion that was there in the country? The reality of the matter, the death knell rang the moment he pulled out of the election, and Ekuru Okot went to court and got his name back on the ballot. That was the death knell to that particular journey, and therefore it must be understood by all and sundry that the journey to Canaan ended. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, history will judge us, but the truth is that bus ended, and it can only be boarded again in 2022. As per right now, Raila Odinga needs to get his feet on the ground and make his legacy as a Pan-Africanist, which I think he's on the right step to do.
Husband, what happens to his supporters? That question that has been asked so many times. Does he leave them orphaned, like Dismas did allude to?
Well, I think there's a sense in which you might say that a lot of his orphans are probably thinking of where they're left in all this. And to that extent, you may want to interrogate the whole arrangement further, but I don't think there are many answers. To some extent, you may also have to ask yourself that how many people have been appointed envoys before, ambassadors to different countries, but after the 5 years, they serve and they still come back, and contest for political positions. And I think this is something that most of his supporters are holding. They know that.
So this is not necessarily the end of his political journey. This is not necessarily
the end of his political journey. And I think even the analogy of Canaan, for instance, just to respond to Mark, it doesn't mean that if Raila was taking people to Canaan, the journey to Canaan has ended. I think the handshake in itself was an all-inclusive vehicle to ensure that we all go to Canaan, and if possible, just make the situation that we are in more of a Canaan situation. And I think to that extent, you may say that this is now a responsibility of President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga to ensure that the vision that the people are looking forward to in Canaan is realized against the backdrop of this handshake. But speaking of Southern Sudan, I think there isn't a better person to deal with the issues of Southern Sudan, because I think they had something going on in Ethiopia and
IGAD, which collapsed.
Yeah, which collapsed, and you're looking for somebody who is respected beyond the boundaries of just one particular country. And if you look around this region, I think there isn't a better person than Raila Odinga. And I want to pray. I teach a lot of students from Southern Sudan, and they have this yearning to go back and make a difference in their country. I want to pray that he will nurture a deal that will see peace in Southern Sudan and bring together the president and Dr. Riek Machar.
All right. So it is just a detour somewhere past the Red Sea en route to Canaan. Kipchumba, what is your analysis of this? Arele being the special envoy to South Sudan vis-a-vis his Kenyan political activity?
First of all, you must thank the President Uhuru Kenyatta for taking the step. After such a grueling electioneering period and the names that were thrown around, from Muguruki to all those names, for giving Raila Odinga the chance to exercise his statesmanship and to exercise his longevity, because we must give it also to Raila Odinga, is one of the longest, the politicians with the longest career in this part of sub-Saharan Africa. So we must thank the president for that. Secondly, Raila Odinga has certain credentials that you cannot take away from them, that he has gathered along the way. One of it is that having been through whatever he has been through, he has something to offer to this young nation, the South Sudanese nation. And my prayer is that may he succeed in that venture. But secondly, what we must look and we must interrogate from a point of governance and political strategy is this. We must not lose sight that whenever somebody loses an election, it is their right to be appointed as special envoy. That one should not subvert the course of democracy. Democracy is founded on the ideology that if you win, a winner of the majority takes the whole thing. That is how democracy is structured. So we should not misconstrue the appointment of Raila Odinga as a special envoy to mean that we are trying to develop some Kenyan way of democratic thinking. First of all, we must appreciate that Raila Odinga lost an election. That is the first point of accepting this. Canaan going to Misri or going to Djibouti or which country they were heading to, that journey is no longer there. Secondly, to the Raila support base, I think we need to be supporting the ideas Raila advances, not the person Raila is. So for us to say that the Raila supporters will be disfranchised or they are stranded is a wrong thing. What we need to inculcate in the Kenyan populace is supporting somebody based on ideology and not individualistic support.
All right, fair enough. Final thing, this one. Do you think that Raila Odinga, is there a possibility, remotely even, that this could be the end for Raila Odinga's political activity in Kenya?
Not at all.
In terms of running for the top office?
No, not at all. Anybody who writes off Raila today, that's a big mistake. That's been a novice in the Kenyan political space. Raila Odinga has got more than 9 lives, just like his other friend, Moses Wetangula. He knows how to metamorphosize and come back smelling like a fresh rose. So anybody right now who is breaking into a dance and song, hoping that by having Raila take up on regional issues, then is out of the Kenyan political space, that's a waste of time.
All right.
And going back to what Karodi had indicated, in Kenya, we don't have a culture of ideologies nor philosophies. So when people support particular leaders, it's not because they've got a heavy leaning towards a particular philosophy. We support our personalities who've been able to conquer their tribes and emerge as tribal lords. So for Karori to expect people to say, I'm supporting a particular politician because he's got a solid ideology is a lie. If anything, the people who've come up in the Kenyan political space with their ideologies is somebody like Professor Ole Kiapi or Ekura Ukot or Dida. Those are the few politicians you can actually look at and say they've got a specific policy. And if you run in Kenya on a particular policy and you hope to get votes, then you will end up getting as many votes as Dida got.
All right. Let's move away from that. Of course, we will be keeping an eye on Raila Odinga's visits and talks in efforts to bring peace to South Sudan. Let's go back to the Sunday Standard on page 10 and 11. There's a special report on corruption on both pages. At the top there, you can see they have outlined 11 different cases of corruption. There's Eurobond, amounts is 250 billion. There's the NYS 1, which involved 1.6 billion Kenya shillings. NYS 2, as it's been called, 9 billion Kenya shillings. The Ministry of Health, remember that, 5 billion shillings. Youth Fund, there was 80 million shillings. In terms of the IEBC, the amount involved was 50 million. All these, some of for the IEBC, the investigations are still ongoing, as well as the Youth Fund. Kenya Pipeline Company, there's another ongoing investigation involving 647 million. Officials facing graft allegations of some awards, some tenders. Kenya Power, there is also 10.1 billion irregular backdating of bills amounting to 10.1 billion. Investigation still ongoing. NHIF, 800 million is the amount. NSSF, 11 billion. JKIA, 55 billion. Make sure you grab your copy of the Sunday Standard and take a look at this. But let's go back to the cover page. And Raila wants decisive action on graft lords. NASA leader tells Uhuru to take stern action against architects of corruption. I think that he has proposed to the president a new way of dealing with culprits after past exposés were not acted upon. We remember that the NYS 1, 23 individuals who had been taken to court were released. Nobody was convicted from that. But Raila wants decisive action on graft lords. What we've become accustomed to is Raila being the whistleblower, making Kenyans know that this amount of money has been stolen and pushing, the national government. That is what happened between 2013 and 2017. But now he is part and parcel of Uhuru Kenyatta's administration, and all of a sudden we can't hear him. There is a lot happening, obscene amounts of money that cannot be accounted for, but there's nobody to rally for Kenyans. But now he wants decisive action. Do you think, Mark, that he can make any impact in terms of dealing with corruption from inside? The inside that he is.
But you're surprising me. Raila is not on the inside of Uhuru's government. He does not hold any executive influence. But I understand.
But do you agree that he has been very quiet?
He has been uncharacteristically quiet, that's one. And two, there's the expectation among Kenyans, because we are used to it for a very long time. Raila Odinga was the official opposition. He was the official whistleblower. He was the one who blew the lid off of a lot of corruption scandals. But the question I have is not just Raila Odinga's role in this fight against corruption. My question really is still on page 1 of the Standard, where it says parents and teachers in fresh exam theft plot. And that really begs the question that if I, as a parent, am willing to bribe for my son to pass an exam, then what am I teaching the next generation? For me, these corruption scandals are not a Raila thing, they're not an Uhuru thing, they're a Kenyan thing. We as a nation need to address ourselves. And I think that perhaps what Providence has given us is an opportunity for us to see the fight of corruption beyond the gates and the realm of Raila Odinga. We cannot expect that one person by the name of Raila Odinga can save us from our own bad behavior, from our own bad culture. So therefore, I expect fully that Raila Odinga should participate in the fight against corruption. But I think it's time for us to change. Let's be very honest. These are 11 corruption scandals. How many Nairobians have demonstrated against it? Life in Kenya is going on as per normal, yet the theft of our public coffers is rampant. So is the issue really Raila Odinga, or do we have a population that feels nothing about the corruption that is happening in our country, and come 2022, we will vote the same way?
Very fair point you make there. But you've spoken about the national morals in general, which is fine, and it's a very fair point. But back to corruption, this story.
Yes.
I'm taking you back there. It's the president holds, the buck stops there, right?
Yes.
The president is in some kind of deal with Raila Odinga. So between the Raila Odinga of 2013 to 2017 and the Raila Odinga we have now, which Raila Odinga is more effective in helping the fight?
That's a very
corruption?
good question, because we must ask ourselves, is it the exposure of corruption that helped us, or is it the actual jailing and returning of public monies that have been found in the hands of these culprits? Is that more expedient? And therefore, we should ask ourselves, is Raila Odinga more useful in exposing these crimes, or is he more useful in being part of the system that can actually deal with this? Now, history is the only one that can answer that. And my hope is this, that when they came up with that document, one of the key points among the 9 points was the dealing with corruption and public ethos. So in the fight against corruption, it is my expectation that Raila Odinga, within the ambit of government, should be able to support Uhuru Kenyatta in the fight against corruption.
All right. Dismas, what do you think?
Well, when you start discussing corruption, I don't know whether we need to sanitize corruption by saying corruption, or we just say it's open thievery, thuggery, robbery with violence. Because let's just appreciate these figures. Rwanda's annual budget is 258 billion Kenyan shillings. And the amount of money stolen in Kenya annually is double that. So effectively, the amount of money which disappears from public coffers can finance Rwanda for 2 financial periods. And if you go to Rwanda, you are told Rwanda is clean, their military is agile, infrastructure works. They're putting up an international airport, which is going to be better than JKIA. And yet we are seated here asking ourselves, where does the buck stop and what is Raila supposed to be doing? Raila does not have any power to arrest or order prosecution. He doesn't have that power. The buck stops with the President of the Republic of Kenya. And we must run away from these digressing, beating around issues. That this thing is a moral issue, that as a society we have failed. We're in our homes having coffee while corruption is taking place. Every 5 years go for an election, we vote in a president, and the buck stops with the president. It's the president who is supposed to be furious. And in the last couple of days, it's displayed that he's furious, and you are able to see action. So for me, I find it almost amusing for Mark here to tell us that he has not seen Kenyans in the streets doing a protest, yet they exercised their democratic will on a particular day and voted in President Kenyatta. So the buck stops with President Kenyatta. Let's go to the basics. Majority of these guys who are accused of corruption are President Kenyatta's appointees. He appointed them into office. Now, a number of them have been told to take a walk. I don't know whether they've actually resigned or stepped aside. But can't he just become so furious? He says, this is not the legacy I want to leave. Because essentially, these guys are injuring his family name. They're injuring his reputation. He's the one who's supposed to crack the whip. Number two, it's so curious that on the recent allegations, especially around the National Cereals and Produce Board and NYS2, key parliamentarians are not speaking. I've not heard the majority leader in the National Assembly, Duale, speaking about this. I've not heard the minority leader, Mbadi, speaking about this.
Just hold on that thought. We'll discuss that in much detail. Is President Uhuru Kenyatta losing the war on corruption? Should that be top of the agenda, even above the big four anyway? We'll get into much more detail in that. Because of time, Hesbon, very quickly, will Raila Odinga be decisive, effective in helping Uhuru Kenyatta fight
Yes,
grafts?
I can confidently say that the traditional way in which you fought corruption is where you have a whistleblower, and more often than not, it has always been Raila. We glorify whatever is happening, and eventually we have a generation that is growing up wanting to be corrupt. And I think the silence and the strategy that is taken against the backdrop of this handshake seems to be something that will work because right now there is no way you'll be accused of being corrupt and you run back to opposition, or say your opposition is witch hunting and you run back to the government. They have a strategy. And I want to believe that the strategy is to ensure that it is not politicized. You cannot run to Raila and say the government is fighting me. You cannot run to Uhuru and say opposition is fighting me. This, I think, is the best way to go. That the silence that we are witnessing from both the president and Raila Odinga, and the fact that Raila Odinga is saying that he has given some strategies on how to handle this, actually tells me that this is a totally different way of dealing with corruption. And I want to believe that we'll see consequences of this and we'll see the rule of law take its course. Because, again, it's not everyone who is mentioned that is guilty. It is the rule of law, investigations, and if there is concerted effort between Raila Odinga and the president, I don't think there is anywhere where somebody can run to.
All right. Kipchumba, very quickly, something that has been mentioned is past exposés that were not acted upon. What will be different this time?
Then the danger we have always waded to as a country is looking at corruption after it, discussing it in very huge and heavy adjectives after it has occurred. The problem is here, we need to ask ourselves, going forward, what do? We cannot spend our entire life crying about spilled milk. It's the same as going to a mortuary and crying about people already dead. What we need to do is to prevent those who are alive from dying. That is where we need to. We cannot, even if we gloss the whole day about the corruption incidents that have happened and try to reinvent, the wheel is already round. What we can do is this. Look at what we have institutions in this country, and institutions which are financed annually. KRA gets annual returns for every individual who is having a PIN number. What do we do with it? Today, somebody declares that their annual income is 1 million. But the same person has an account which has more than 100 million. Who is failing who? Why do we give KRA this information and they do not act on it? Two, we have anti-banking fraud unit. They should tell us any irregular movement of money so that we can, and as we look at the irregular movement, we can freeze those accounts, have the money, bring the people culpable on board. But looking at the policy issues, we need now to, I think we need to reestablish the Kenyan state, its legitimacy in terms of moral, political, and economical issues. The Kenyan state we have had has not been holding ground. Secondly, we need to rethink the Ndegwa report that allowed civil servants to engage in private businesses. Because that is the root cause of all these problems.
All right, we'll get into that. We'll get back into that. Are we losing the war on graft? Many thanks for staying with us here on the Sunday edition. Let's take another quick break. When we come back, we take a bit of a break from the corruption cases that are currently ongoing, talk about Nairobi politics, the Nairobi show that Sonko continues to give Nairobians. Don't go too far.